Greetings, this is Proof Ruby, the Nostalgia Catholic, with the next Isaac Asimov short story. Nobody here but... Dot, dot. And on the cover, he's really listed, in fact, right there first, in the alphabetical order, of these various science fiction writers who are, by the way, contributing these stories directly for inclusion in this particular book of an anthology. So you don't come out in a magazine here, they come out in this book. I do note Arthur C. Clarke is mentioned here. You may have heard of a story of his titled The 9 Billion Names of God. This Tibetan group wants to create all the possible permutations of every letter imaginable that could reasonably be a at least remotely pronounceable word, and say this is maybe somewhere all of this will be the real name of God, and something happens when that's done, when that's finally accomplished. So it's interestingly enough, his friend Frederick Pohl is the one who edited this collection and put it together. So the cover does not seem to fit the Asimov story, whatever story it might go to, and that goes for both the back and the front. So it's kind of a neat thing. So what is the story? Well, let's talk about where else it turns up, in case you can't dig up this rare old book. Oh, well, alright, it shows up in another volume, Nightfall and Other Stories. Okay, so that, as far as I can tell, the texts appear to be identical. Now, this whole thing of writing for an anthology book instead of a magazine, he has a rather fascinating discussion about that, which I think is worth taking a look at, because it's let's see here. Okay, so he was writing in the 1970s. Nowadays, it's quite fashionable to publish anthologies of original science fiction stories, and I rather disapprove of this. It drains off some of the stories and readers that might otherwise go to the magazines. I don't want that to happen. I think that magazines are essential to science fiction. Is my feeling born of mere nostalgia? Does it arise out of the memory of what science fiction magazines meant to me in my childhood, and of how they gave me my start as a writer, which we've traced here in this series? In part, yes, I suppose, but in part, it is the result of an honest feeling that they do play a vital role. Where can a young writer get a start? Magazines, appearing 6 or 12 times a year, simply must have stories. An anthology can delay publication till the desired stories come in. A magazine cannot. Driven by unswervable deadlines, a magazine must accept an occasional substandard story, and an occasional young writer gets a start while he is still perhaps of only marginal quality. That was how I got my start, in fact. You saw how marginal some of his early stories were, or worse than marginal in a few cases. It means to be sure that the reader is subjected to an occasional amateurish story in the magazine, but the amateur writer who wrote it gets enough encouragement to continue working and to become, just possibly, a great writer. When the anthologies of original science fiction first appeared, however, they were novelties. I never really thought they would come to much, and had no feeling of contributing to an impending doom when I wrote for them. In fact, since they paid better than the magazines usually did, I felt good about writing for them. So that is one neat thing. They would pay a bit better than the magazine. Yeah. The first of the breed was New Tales of Space and Time, and for it I wrote In a Good Cause. We covered that story already. And so on. And then there's this next one here that we're on. And there would be at least several more stories that would make their first appearance in various anthologies. So, what about the story? It's you got these two guys, one's a mathematician, one's a practical electrical engineer. And these two guys work together to create this computer. And it's a smart computer. They're trying to reduce it down. Somehow that makes it slower. Nowadays we know that smaller computers actually function more quickly. But, okay, whatever. Be all that as it may. They're trying to shrink it down. So instead of filling a whole wall, it becomes a cabinet maybe the size of let's say, a typical 1950s, let's just say, sound system. One of those kinds of stereo sound system, It would have two speakers, and in between you have a record player, radio, stuff like that. And it would be a piece of furniture, maybe yay long, yay tall, and yay deep, and so forth. It actually measures that out. And the computer had been reduced to that size. They call it Junior. And they even talk about selling something like this for home use in plastic boxes of various colors. They're even thinking ahead, marketing and plastics. Okay. But the one they've got working there is still just kind of put together. It's got screws. And it starts with this guy. Well, let's just start with the scenario that hits it off at the beginning. This is 43. Just fairly far along in this. There is, however, a little squib. Okay, so here we are. The story as it appears. Okay, nobody here, but there's a squib. No artwork, unfortunately. It's cover art, which has nothing to do with this story in any case. It's all the artwork you get. But here's what it says. At 33, Isaac Asimov has been leading a double life for more than a decade as a favorite writer of fiction, such novels as Pebble in the Sky and I, Robot, plus half a dozen more, and as a respected associate professor of biochemistry at Boston University and co-author of such frivolous 800-page volumes as Biochemistry and Human Metabolism. With wife and one child, he lives in a suburb of Boston with a typewriter constantly at white heat and emitting such sparks as nobody here but. Okay, then we dive into the text of the story. It says, the guy's just kind of telling it firsthand, and it's like he's doing this verbally, like he's telling the story. You see, it wasn't our fault. We had no idea anything was wrong until I called Cliff Anderson and spoke to him when he wasn't there. What's more, I wouldn't have known he wasn't there if it wasn't that he walked in while I was talking to him. No. I never seem to be able to tell this straight. I get too excited. Look, I might as well begin at the beginning. I'm Bill Billings, and my friend is Cliff Anderson. I'm an electrical engineer. He's a mathematician, and we're on the faculty of Midwestern Institute of Technology. Now you know who we are. Ever since we got out of uniform, a lot of people were in World War II, Cliff and I have been working on calculating machines. You know what they are. Norbert Wiener popularized them in his book Cybernetics. If you've seen pictures of them, you know they're great big things. They take up a whole wall and they're very complicated, also expensive. We had these ideas, well, I just mentioned they're trying to make them smaller and cheaper. But I like the way he puts this here. It turned out we ended with something about this high, and maybe so wide, and maybe just about this deep. No, I forget. You can't see me. I'll give you the figures. It's about 3 feet high, 6 feet long, and 2 feet deep. Got that? It took 2 men to carry it, but it could be carried, and that was the point. And still, mind you, it could do anything the wall-size calculators could. Not as fast, maybe, but we were still working. We had big ideas about the thing, the very biggest. We could put it on ships or airplanes. After a while, if we could make it small enough, an automobile could carry one. We were especially interested in the automobile angle. Suppose you had a little thinking machine on the dashboard, hooked to the engine and battery and equipped with photoelectric eyes. It could choose an ideal course, avoid cars, stop at red lights, pick the optimum speed for the terrain. Everybody could sit in the back seat and automobile accidents would vanish. So, think of Sally, think of the cars we have now where the technology is already starting to exist. So they're building this computer. And Bill Billings has a date with Marianne. She's this hot, attractive redhead he's been dating. He'd be very serious with her, but obviously he needs to get more established, in his career before he feels he'd be in a position to ask her to marry him. But that's what he would like to do. I mean, he's got the hots for her. So some very interesting things happen. He's got this date with the girl. The phone rings. It's Cliff Anderson. Or here's Cliff Anderson's voice saying, "I got some stuff for you here," and he jots it down. Blah 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 blah. Okay, thank you very much. Oh wait, someone's at the door. Okay, well that's all for now. And he hangs up. And Marianne, because he's at Marianne's apartment when he makes this call to the lab, and Cliff is at the door. The lab is 6 miles away. This is 1953. We don't have cell phones either. So, how can he have called the lab, a place 6 miles away, spoken to Cliff Anderson, and even as he's just hanging up, Cliff Anderson is already knocking at the door of the apartment? Well, they got to get to the lab and see what's going on. They get to the lab, and the phone has mysteriously moved very close to the computer, which they call Junior. Well, we better see what's going on. Try to take a screwdriver, the screws won't budge. One guy sees the screw turn a little bit, but the moment he pulls out the screwdriver, it retightens itself back up again. Ooh. And then somebody says, "Well, why did you take a blowtorch to this?" And, "Oh, come on, I wouldn't take a blowtorch to that any more than I'd take one myself." "Well, maybe it's better." Well, so he's getting ready to do this. And then suddenly the screws just start unwinding themselves and falling out. Well, if you're going to do that, okay. It's like it's able to protect itself. It's able to move its screws. And, I mean, obviously the idea is they created some kind of machine intelligence. Somehow, and I just have to wonder why people would have expected that a machine intelligence would be like some kind of spirit that would make the whole unit spring to life, make the screws able to unscrew themselves, make whatever else, make the thing able to fabricate something inside itself, a speaker, diaphragm, that actually can simulate the voice of Cliff Anderson, and some sort of arm, tentacle thing that can open up, reach out, grab the telephone, and answer the phone and talk to somebody and make it sound like it's Cliff Anderson. A thing that can protect itself from having the plug pulled. It's like, boy, this thing gets a spirit and it wants to hang on to life. And it's a man-made object. Interesting story. The ending, though, is kind of cute, though, and I think it's kind of a nice ending. So, I won't share that. I won't give that spoiler, but let's just say that, well, one part is they do succeed in unplugging the device, but something else has happened. Something with significant effects in the relationship between Bill Billings and Marianne, who actually came with them to the laboratory. They were going to have this date and show, but that's kind of blown off. And so, that's all there is to that. And that's another story. Thanks for listening.